I mean, so first of all, one thing that should be clear is that folks who are litigating this on the pro-choice side expected to lose, and the strategy, I think, was designed to be one that would lead to a clear loss. So that is why you saw both the Solicitor General for Mississippi and Julie Rickleman and General Prelogger all basically saying there is no middle ground here. If you uphold this Mississippi law, you might as well say you've overturned Roe. Why progressives are doing that is because on some level they understand that the Supreme Court is not their friend, and that if you're going to lose, you might as well lose in a way that's transparent. Another reason that progressives, I don't think, have reacted as much to recent developments in the Supreme Court is that a lot of ordinary people have no idea what the hell the Supreme Court is doing when it comes to abortion, because John Roberts is there obfuscating and obscuring it all the time. And so the goal, I think, was that if you're going to lose, you might as well get a clear repudiation of Roe that people can rally around, right? And so I think that was, and I think that's what it sounds like is coming. Brett Kavanaugh on several occasions brought up a point. He's clearly already written something on this, that the Constitution is, in his words, scrupulously neutral, neither pro-choice nor pro-life, which sounds like something he's planning on writing in an opinion overruling Roe, and packaged in kind of conventional Kavanaugh fashion as like, hey guys, I'm this nice person and I'm just trying to be fair. Amy Coney Barrett seems skeptical that anyone relied on access to abortion because, in her view, safe haven laws, which allow unwanted newborns to be left at fire stations and other locations without penalty, that meant that no one would have to parent if they didn't want to, because they could simply give children up for adoption, which she seemed to think had not been the case in 1992 or 1973.
Yeah, a lot of liberal media I saw making a lot of that statement in particular, because she is the parent of children that she adopted, but also not children that she adopted from this country, which begs the question, it kind of exposes the extent to which the adoption process is difficult, how many kids, American adoptees, are left fallow because the process is so difficult and it is easier to go to other places, and the ethical implications of filling up U.S. orphanages more kind of go completely unremarked upon. But I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, I mean, I think also it's just, the idea that that somehow people don't need abortion access feels like something you would say if you have a lot of privilege, and not like something you would say if you don't, right? And then, I mean, the other justices, I think Justice Gorsuch spent most of the argument trying to make it sound as if there was no way not to overrule Roe if you were going to side with Mississippi. Justice Alito asked a lot of questions designed to drive Eric crazy, to the effect that in 1868, no one could have recognized the right to abortion because states were criminalizing abortion, which of course is true of like birth control, interracial marriage, and a lot of other things too. And Clarence Thomas, in my favorite question of the day, asked that if it was, cool that states punished pregnant people for using cocaine, then before viability, why was it not? Which is sort of the starting point of the question is, it's cool to punish pregnant people of color who are using drugs. So like, if we can do that, why can't we ban abortion too? I was like, wow, that's the opening question. Okay. So in summary, it went really well for Mississippi. I think there's some sense that Chief Justice Roberts was trying to hold out as what he would pass off as a compromise, the idea that the court can get rid of viability, but keep the idea of a right to choose, at least for the moment. He didn't seem to get any interest in that, except maybe from Amy Coney Barrett, who did ask one viability question. So I think going into June, the question is going to be whether Barrett wants to overrule Roe over the course of like 2 decisions, or whether she wants to go with Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Thomas, and Alito and do it right away. And then if they do it right away, I would assume that John Roberts would join them. It would probably be 6-3. And then the question would just be what happens after that? Do they try to cabinet, or is there some sort of sense that all of substantive due process is going to go, which I think Thomas would like. There'll be questions, of course, about when they say states can ban abortion, what they mean by abortion, because we're all operating from an assumption in this conversation that we define abortion the same way. We know from the debates about the contraceptive mandate that that's false, that a lot of conservatives define IUDs and emergency contraceptives and some infertility treatments as abortion too.
How is an IUD? Sorry, there's no implantation. Like, what
insanity.
Is
that? It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, basically, they argue. I mean, I'm not like saying this is true, but they argue that it prevents implantation, and that once you have a fertilized egg, if you prevent implantation, it's abortion. And obviously, that's not what ACOG says IUDs do, but that's kind of
Oh
where we
boy.
are. But so I mean, and that's an important point to say that like we can even agree that I think the damage Roe did is overstated. But I think we can agree that Roe did some damage, and I certainly think that relying on the Supreme Court for progressives taking Roe as just a small part of it has been tremendously damaging. I think you can say that and then still acknowledge how, you know, I don't think people who don't study this or talk to the people I talk to have any idea how bad this is going to be. I mean, what I hear pretty often is it's mind blowing. So to say then that like, okay, if Roe goes, it's going to just be like it is now because the South and the Midwest, it already sucks. It's like no, it's not. That's an understatement.
A couple observations about your argument really fast. My views on Justice Scalia are well known. I just wrote a thing that it is an absolute stain on this country that Harvard has a chair in his name, that there's a law school named after him. He was a sexist, misogynist, homophobic asshole. It's what he was. I'm sorry, but it's what he was.
No apologies needed here.
I wish he would have been wherever he is smoldering down there in the flames. I hope he heard Justice Roberts using Justice Blackmun's private papers to make the legal point that somehow viability was not an essential part of Roe and therefore not an essential part of Casey. That kind of reasoning is unconscionable in under any standard. First of all, Blackmun signed on to Casey's viability line, first of all, so many years, 20 years after Roe. Second of all, the idea that we would look to the private papers of a justice to interpret a decision signed on by 6 other justices is insane. Scalia was always in favor of saying never use legislative history. I think he's totally wrong about that. But suggesting that, Roberts 3 times mentioned Justice Blackmun's private papers. I don't think anything, that's one of the most absurd thing that's happened in the Supreme Court in my lifetime. So that's one point I want to make. The other point I want to make, 2 other points. One quickly. Alito was who Alito is, a self-centered, obnoxious pig. And that's how he was throughout the entire argument. And there's no getting around that. Justice Barrett, boy, she's really an enigma in a lot of ways. I know her a little. And she always seemed to me as a decent, warm, caring type of human being. She did. We couldn't be more different in terms of her unbelievable faith and my unbelievable agnosticism. But she struck me as someone who was decent. This whole notion that adoption is the answer is one of the most indecent things I've ever heard in my life. For the state to say to a woman, I have 3 daughters. For a state to, because I don't want to speak, I've been accused recently of some things I don't think I should have been accused of, but I want to be clear about this. The idea that the state would tell my pregnant, raped, alleged, 14, 15-year-old daughter, you have to carry your fetus to term, even though you don't want to, but it's okay because you can give it away later. I can't even get my hands around that. What kind of human being would think that? I can't even. And the idea I think Mary hit it on the head. She's just so in her little world of privilege. And I don't even think she grew up wealthy, unlike most of the justices.
Well, do we think this is a faith issue? Because I saw someone tweet the other day, they're going to overturn Roe and no one's going to say a thing about the Bible. And it's true that in all of these conversations I've been watching over the course of the past week, very little direct reference. I haven't seen any, frankly, direct reference to any kind of biblical or religious, spiritual.
Well, Sotomayor did. Sotomayor asked the question.
What did she ask?
Sotomayor said, isn't this really all just based on religion? I thought it was a terrible question, but she asked it.
And what was the response?
Justice Alito threw a softball to the Mississippi lawyer and said, aren't there ethicists, secular ethicists who are
against abortion? This is my point, because it seems like the right is not making this a religious issue. It seems like there has been a real assiduous, tiptoeing around what used to be, when I was coming up, a full-blown Christian right argument.
Well, it's what you hear publicly versus what they say to each other. I mean, for example, right, the argument that we were all being told was abortion hurts women. Has anybody noticed how that didn't come up during the oral argument? Because it didn't, because that was an argument that was for public consumption, and eventually they gave up on it. And they substituted the whole people don't need, then the new argument is people don't need abortion anymore because of adoption, because women are already equal, because there's, so I mean, I think the religious arguments are all there, and they bubble up to the surface sometimes when we see things like Operation Rescue, right, which was an explicitly religious clinic blockade movement. The people who go to clinics and blockade them today don't bring signs that talk about secular ethics. They bring signs that talk about religion. It's just what we hear from the DC groups. Yeah.
The point I'm making is not that it doesn't exist, but that it's being very purposefully invisibilized, it seems.
Oh, yeah, totally.
For credibility
100%.
reasons, right?
Definitely.
And so part of what seems like the inconsistency you're talking about, Professor Segall, with Amy Coney Barrett's framing here is that there's the big gaping hole here is, I do think, for spiritual reasons, the future life of this fetus is worth more. I do think abortion is murder, and that's why I do think it's more ethical to put a 14-year-old rape survivor through having to bring a child to term and give birth to it than to kill the fetus.
They're starting to say that now. That's why you don't see rape and incest exceptions anymore.
Right. I want to point. Yeah, I'm sorry. So I blog at Dorf on Law with law professor Mike Dorf. His wife, Sherry Kolb, is a law professor as well. I really want everybody listening to this podcast to go to Dorf on Law. I wrote something there. You can ignore my stuff. Mike wrote something there. You can ignore Mike's stuff. But please read Sherry's blog post, which was on Thursday night, whenever this aired. That's Thursday. Because it is the best statement of the anti-the fetus is a person idea that I've ever seen. And she and Mike wrote a book about this, but her point, her points are just so strong, which is whatever you think of abortion, don't pretend this collection of cells is a human being. It is not. It can't feel. It can't think. It is not sensitive. DNA, you scrape DNA off a dead person, it's alive. That's her point. You scrape DNA off a dead person, that DNA is still, that's what a fetus is. It's DNA. It's not a human being. Potential life, sure, we all agree it's potential life. But it's not a baby, it's not an unborn person, and it's not a human being. It's a collection of cells.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the thing. If you are a religious person, you just feel differently.
That's fine.
And there's no arguing with that.
And that's fine, but don't impose your religious view on others.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, what we're going to get, I mean, I think, Brianna, if you want to see the religious arguments, maybe not made explicitly, but get ready for arguments that are consistent with the personhood position, because that's what you're going to see in states. I mean, they're already passing laws without rape and incest exceptions. They're already filing briefs saying abortion is unconstitutional because a fetus is a person. I mean, the only reason that wasn't happening before was because it was viewed to be a strategically stupid idea. And if the Supreme Court sends the message that it's open season, it's not going to be a stupid idea anymore, and that's going to change.
So Mary has studied this 10 times more than I have, has written 4 books on the subject.
It's going to be 5, actually.
5 books. 5 books on 5 books on the subject. I defer to her expertise about the past. About the future, I'm not quite as sure, and I think it's important to talk about.
You're not quite sure about what?
It's going to be as horrific as Mary thinks it's going to be.
No, it's not. I'm just saying that's what they're going to try to do. I have no idea.
I think it's going to fail. I think it's going to fail for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, I actually do too. What they're going to try. Well, I don't know. Living in Florida where, I mean, I think it might work in places like Mississippi.
I think...
Well, it's already worked. There's already no abortion in Mississippi, right?
Pretty much.
And I think it's going to get much worse. And am I confident that progressives are going to particularly care about what happens in Mississippi?
But hold on. But this is where I think we disagree. Because we're taking out the coercion from DC piece of the puzzle. Now, not in the next 2 or 3 years, but over a long 10 or 15 year period, what Planned Parenthood is going to do, and I've been asking them to do this for 30 years, they're going to start it now, is go full bore on young people, on middle school kids and high school kids, and convince them it's not that you have a constitutional right to abortion, because that's very contestable and blah, blah, blah. It's that you should vote pro-choice because you won't be equal if you don't.
Oh Lord, I hope you're wrong. I mean, this is a mess politically. I mean,
It's worked
this
for
isn't
gay
your
rights.
guys' jobs.
It's worked for gay rights. Listen,
But that's why we have this whole discourse now about CRT and all of this like moral panic about what gets taught in school.
Not race, but
that's the CRT conversation is part and parcel of a larger, longer historical trend of conservatives recognizing that schools, colleges, et cetera, are like by their nature liberalizing projects, not because there is like a pogrom, like a vendetta that's being enacted, but because people who are attracted to being a teacher, being a professor and stuff tend to be more progressive. And that's why they're able to weaponize that into victories like we just saw in Virginia.
But notice that, and I've been as outspoken as anyone about this CRT fraud. That's absurd. But notice, though, that they've not done the same thing with same-sex marriage. They haven't. And there's a reason for that.
Now they don't need to because they've got the Supreme Court and they're coming back to them with open.
No, they won't.
But also, there was definitely like gay panic about schools. There's definitely a panic about they're going to teach my kid about anal sex in school. All the sex education stuff was largely in some portion about gay panic. There's always there's a book with two boys kissing in the schoolroom. There was definitely some of that. I just think that the cultural forces in the other way just won out with that one.
Real quick, there's two things. I want to say that my 14 and 12-year-olds, not just in their liberal school in Atlanta, but their friends in rural Georgia, the issue of gay rights is not, it's well accepted by a huge majority of the American people now. It just is, which explains Gorsuch's vote, by the way, in Bostock. 65% of the people agreed with that vote. It just is. We need that same idea on abortion of those of us who are pro-choice. The place to do that is the schools. It really is. And so I urge pro-choice people to think about that.
Well, I just want to ask one question, Professor Ziegler, before you have to go, because I was very curious about the discourse around viability. And I wonder what you think of, viability as the linchpin of this the whole time. Was that a vulnerability of the original decision in Roe, given how, medical standards changing affects viability? Your initial point about how the viability length was extended in America as opposed to other countries just because women couldn't come up with the money fast enough because we don't have a universal health care system. This juxtaposition that came out in the remarks, I think Alito's remarks about, well, if it's about choice, then what does viability have to do with it? You should be able to choose whenever. Was that a kind of, was it a mistake to kind of hinge so much of the right to abortion access on the idea of it's okay because the kid isn't viable yet?
I mean, yes and no, right? I mean, I think that, so I agree with you that this is political power, right? And I think that at the end of the day, if the court had written a much better opinion predicated on the Equal Protection Clause without viability, I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg's argument that we wouldn't be here or that the backlash to Roe would have been less intense is wrong. I don't think that the quality of the reasoning of Roe is the main problem. I think that it's the fact that it legalized abortion, and that really pissed a lot of people off who were already active in a pretty effective anti-abortion movement that had managed to almost reinstate criminal prohibitions on abortion in New York State, for crying out loud. They were already doing that. And they were not going to be happy to have any kind of reproductive right on any kind of foundation for any kind of period of time. The goal for the movement then as now is personhood, meaning no legal abortion except maybe in cases in which a pregnant person's life was threatened. So viability was a vulnerability in the sense that one could make more intellectually respectable arguments if one is part of the Federalist Society or something like that about what's wrong with Roe. And so in that sense, it made it easier for the conservative legal elite to make the case against Roe. And maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. But I think in terms of why the passion about Roe and why the amount, the effort that was put into unraveling Roe changed how presidents nominate Supreme Court justices, in my opinion. My book that's coming out in 2022 is about how it helped to change our rules of campaign finance and led to Citizens United and the sort of surge in outside spending, which helped to weaken the GOP establishment and helped empower populists like Trump and some Tea Partiers. There was a lot done in the name of getting rid of Roe, and that was not because of the quality of its legal reasoning. It was because it was about abortion. Just to give you a sense, when Roe first came down, the anti-abortion movement was offered up a constitutional amendment basically saying Roe is a judicially activist decision. We're going to return this to the states. And uniformly, every single movement organization said this amendment is trash because it doesn't ban abortion in New York and California. We want personhood. Nothing short of personhood as a constitutional amendment is worth the time of day. And they still think that. I think it's just they think that they've realized that getting rid of Roe is a step along the way that's important, and that judicial activism arguments are a great way to get you there. And then once you're there, you can get to personhood later. But I don't know how much of a difference a rule without viability would have made. I mean, historically, I don't think it would have. I mean, it may. I mean, I don't know because it's counterfactual.
I mean, is there an alternative?
Well, one thing about RBG. Hold on. Hold on. One thing about RBG. I want to preserve her memory here. Her bigger argument was not the quality of the reasoning. It was too fast. Roe was too fast. It should have struck down Texas's law, which was much more draconian than Georgia's law, at least as written. And this is how she approached same-sex marriage. So I want to be clear, although she did talk about it.
That's wrong too. But I mean, I agree with it. That's a good point. I mean, I think that the idea that if you had waited until 1973 and gone to people who think that a fetus is a rights-holding person and said, okay, well, you guys have had 10 years to warm up to the idea. I mean, these are foundational, often faith-driven, identity-defining beliefs about everything from, gender to science, to who you listen to in the media. And I think it's incredible hubris on the part of the Supreme Court to expect that it can convince people through the quality of its reasoning to redefine themselves, change their worldviews, and abandon their faith. There's just 0% chance that's going to ever have happened. And I mean, that's, again, because I'm kind of, I think, with you all in the sense that I think the Supreme Court can do a lot of damage, but I think that the Supreme Court's ability to do good in terms of moving the world in a progressive direction is limited for just that reason. I mean, I think that the idea that, a better Roe would have been really fantastic and we wouldn't be in this position ignores why we're in this position, which has much more to do with, I mean, Roe is a part of the problem, but the problem predated Roe, and it goes to our kind of differing belief systems. And those belief systems, by the way, those differences have been exacerbated. I mean, now if I tell you someone is a Trump voter, that's going to bring to mind where they live, what their race is, what their views about race are, probably how educated they are. Our identities are kind of stacked on top of one another in ways that make it even harder to reach one another. And that was true in abortion in 1973. I think it's true now.
But not a better Roe, a slower Roe. And I think there is some truth to that.
I mean, maybe a little bit, but the anti-abortion movement was already... I mean, we had a slower Roe, like in the form of Casey. We've had lots of revisiting of this issue, and the anti-abortion movement, I mean, from their standpoint, it's a human rights movement. And it's really hard to tell someone, you know what, guess what? We've figured it out. We're smarter than you. It's not a human right. You guys were just wrong.
Yeah, which is why viability does seem like a vulnerability. And I'm curious about whether or not there have been other efforts to make the case, like what the arguments look like that don't include that kind of wobbly metric.
Well, in foreign countries, in Germany and other places, they actually do ban abortions, much earlier than we do, but they have exceptions for afterwards, and for dramatic changes in life and health and stuff like that. Is that right, Mary?
Yeah, they do. And I mean, and that might be, I mean, I think that would have been a better line. And, I don't know. I mean, I think for us to have had a more sane conversation about abortion, our party politics would have had to operate pretty differently in the 80s. I think, the religious history of abortion would probably have had to go differently. I think, there would have probably had to have been possible allies for the anti-abortion movement on the left as well as the right to kind of play up some of the kind of, more humane impulses in some of the early movement when it came to things like preventing pregnancy discrimination or offering a social safety net for pregnant people. There are a lot of things that could have happened that didn't happen that might have led to a better debate. And I think, I think a better line in terms of managing backlash to the extent it would have mattered, maybe it would have helped to have waited, maybe it would have helped to draw a line more at the first trimester, because at least that would have tracked popular opinion. Even if it wouldn't have tracked social movement politics.
I am as pro-choice as anyone on the planet, and I think Roe is an act of judicial hubris that has cost us a hell of a lot.
Well, I want to thank you both. This was a really fresh, engaging conversation with a lot of perspectives, I think, that aren't usually dealt with or unpacked in the course of this moment. I certainly haven't heard anything like this anywhere. And I appreciate you both for joining. Professor Ziegler, can you tell our audience where they can find you and your work and perhaps get your upcoming book?
Sure, yeah. So I am on Twitter at Mary R. Ziegler. You can find, my popular writings. Like I had a piece come out in the New York Times this week and in the Atlantic. And I have bylines in CNN and the Boston Globe and Politico sometimes too. The book that's out now is called Abortion and the Law, which is a history of how we got where we are now. And my new book that's coming out in 2022, the one on the kind of decimation of the GOP establishment and how abortion created that, is called Dollars for Life. And I think it's on Amazon. You can pre-order it now, although the Amazon page is not done. So all the blurbs and great famous people telling you how smart I am and all that isn't up. So you just have to go.
They know already.
I can tell people how smart you are. I've been doing that for 3 years now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a depressing read, but it's hopefully helpful for people to see how we got. I mean, and I think Eric will appreciate it because it certainly backs up his point that, obsessions with Roe have been bad for our politics because there's a direct line between Roe, Citizens United, and Trump.
And Heller.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, I don't have as much evidence of that because of the papers I have, but the Roe, Citizens United, Trump line is pretty easy to document. So.
Well, thank you. Your insights are evident. After having listened to you over the course of the past hour. Professor Segall, where can people find you and your work?
Well, I blog once a week pretty much at Dorf on Law. I'm on Twitter at Eastspin Segall, a name my daughter made up for me. And I have 2 books, Supreme Myths, Why the Supreme Court's Not a Court, and Originalism is Faith. If you're interested in originalism, I think that book makes a contribution. And
it's also a fun title, too.
Thank you. And I want to tie this back real quick to our conversation. 4 days ago, my 14-year-old put me on TikTok, and I have done 6 videos, one a day. I've done 6 videos in 1 week. I'm going to in real time tell you what my TikTok situation is, because this is on. I have 13,000 followers. I'm sorry,
it's crazy.
I'm sorry, 3,600 followers, 13,000 likes, and get this, like 60,000 views of those videos. I make that point because it's the last thing I wanted to do. But my social justice warrior 14-year-old told me if I want to reach kids, high school kids and middle school kids, I need to do TikTok. And oh my God, I mean, 50,000 views, 45,000 views in a week.
That's incredible. So I made one TikTok and no one looked at it, and I shut the whole thing down.
My first one.
That's me on Instagram. I don't even know. Like I had to do Instagram once with Katie Couric, and I'm like, "Yo, how do I turn this thing on? Like this sucks."
My first video got 32,000 views. My 14-year-old says it was all luck, but I have no idea. Anyway.
It's just your charisma, Eric. Don't underestimate yourself.
I don't think so. But anyway, so that's
what's your handle? What's your handle? Where can people find your TikTok handle?
On TikTok, I don't even know.
I don't even know.
I don't. I really don't.
It's only for the initiated.
Go to Segall.
Okay,
go to Segall. All right, you know where to find him. You love him. 3-time Bad Faith participant. Thank you so much as well, Professor Segall. Hope to have you back on soon. Your insights were invaluable. And as always, to all our listeners, keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.